Welcome in, all my chickabees and chickabays. That's right. I don't know what either of those are, but you are them. It is basketball by association. My name is Arky Shea. That is Joel C. Cordes. Joel, we haven't gotten back to basketball season yet, but we're heading there as we are doing our division previews leading up to the start of the season.
Shout out to all the chickaboos out there as well. If any of you are listening, we don't want to leave you hanging. And Arky Shea, this is episode 118. And there is a player who has logged 118 career playoff games. He is a very recent player. So we might have a chance to guess who this gentleman is. He's a two-time All-Star who won or got both of his All-Stars while as a running mate of Chris Paul's with the New Orleans Hornets / OKC Hornets, back to the Hurricane Katrina days. He also was a foil for the LeBron James Heatles. Never did win a championship going up against LeBron, but he did get 2 rings the very final 2 years of his career as a savvy veteran on the Golden State Warriors. Want to take a guess as to who this guy might be?
I feel like I was supposed to get it narrowed down, but I felt like I got pulled in like 4 different directions there. So who we got?
This is the David West episode, a guy who, again, 2 rings, 2 All-Stars.
I didn't know he had 2 rings.
Yeah, averaged 20 points per game or close to it 5 different times during his career as a scoring power forward. And yeah, got those 2 rings as a bench guy for the Warriors. Think about those 2 first teams, the loaded Golden State Warriors pre-Durant. David West was there and did not get those rings when he was with the Indiana Pacers going up against LeBron in the Eastern Conference. But man, him and Lance Stevenson and George Hill, Roy Hibbert, Paul George, Danny Granger, those guys, I mean, they gave us some series against Miami. They really did.
Yeah. I just didn't know he ended up with 2 rings. So that's kind of neat. All right. Well, you know what's going to be interesting is when we get to the 200s. I think that's when we're because I think things start to space out a lot. Probably
it's going to be an upper echelon of guys. I have been surprised too for some of these names. Not so much for David West because he was around and his teams were usually good enough to be in the playoffs. But there have been a handful as I've gone through these lists where like, whoa, he logged that many playoff games.
Yeah,
you know, it's eye-opening sometimes.
Do you have access in front of you right now? If not, we'll get to it when the episode comes to it. To the most number of playoff games played.
Yeah, that is.
You don't have to tell me who, and just tell me the number.
Okay. It's 266 is the most playoff games.
So we got about 3 more weeks till we get there, right? if we get recording good.
Yeah, somewhere along that. And
266.
The name should not be surprising.
Okay.
The name is going to continue adding to his list.
Oh, John Moran. I got it. Okay, so
the second place guy on the list, though, with 259 is mind-boggling.
Okay.
He does not belong anywhere in the same sentence as like the top 20, but he's there.
How about
like,
this
kudos to that?
How about this for a 3-year-long tease, huh?
We'll get to him someday. I mean, it's reason for the show to keep going, if nothing else.
Any chance that guy that you just mentioned that's mind-boggling gets mentioned on another episode before we get there? Not just because of the naming it after him, but just because he will be brought up in conversation.
Only if he becomes head coach of the Knicks again.
All right. Okay.
That's a big tease, y'all.
Well,
it's out there. It's been said.
Right to my gonad as we get ready to preview what's about to be the most flip-flop division in all of basketball this year, the NBA's Atlantic Division out of the Eastern Conference, of course. Last year, the Knicks just missed out on winning that division. What was it, Joe? About like half a game, was it?
14, give or take.
That could have that's a solid weekend of work. You could have probably gotten that down to 12, right?
14 games is actually between first to last is actually pretty impressive for the division as a whole. There was no other division that had that little of a disparity. And when you think about the fact that Boston did win the division and Philly tied for first with 51 games apiece, and New York with 37, they do miss the playoffs and was considered a huge disappointment. But all things considered, as far as Boston went, And as much as Philly was a contender, I've only been 14 games ahead. I'm not trying to backhand compliment the Knicks, but it was a tighter division than people realized. And, Brooklyn couldn't even do what they were supposed to do in that division for a lot of different reasons.
Well,
so we got a lot of teams to talk about here.
Let me excuse me, I'm sorry. Let's very briefly review last season, basically how I felt. Could have been better. But also more importantly, for as bad as the Knicks played for long stretches of time, like it really didn't feel like the earth was collapsing, that they were that bad, right?
No.
Like, so it's terrible as they were and blowing like 25-point leads.
Yes.
Like it just didn't feel like it was as bad as being the last place team in the division. As you mentioned, the team that won the division barely showed up until January, right? Like
very true. Yeah,
they barely
looked
showed
dead
up
in the
until
water.
January.
They looked dead in the water.
Right? Brooklyn was the team that was just amidst a giant garbage of chaos pile that was just ridiculous to try to figure out that year. Philly,
and yet started out really hot. Brooklyn was a front runner early.
Right. Philly was a team that I thought had a real shot to be able to win the whole thing. And they played pretty well, to be honest with you. I mean, like they were a good team, but they just never had like the next level gear that sort of would pull them away from a division like that early when they had the opportunity to put some
long-term conconsistency was a problem. You got a different team fair. Each week,
Yeah. And so like I'll be
honest, by the way, let's not short shrift them. Toronto won 48 games, and I think you and I both picked the Raptors to be in last.
I was going to mention, and Toronto was really surprising last year for me. Like I had no idea that they had that kind of staying power throughout the entirety of the season. So
they finished fifth. They finished fifth in the conference, for crying out loud. Like it's crazy when you stop and think about expectations versus reality that all pundits had for the Raptors, and the fact that they got to fifth last year and had literally no bench. Their bench was awful throughout the entire season. But kudos to Nick Nurse and his guys.
Well, let's get to start previewing this year and what we think is going to happen. Joel, since you kicked this thing off, I think we should allow you to sort of drive the boat a little bit here. Like I'm here. I'm probably going to stay the whole podcast.
Very kind of you.
But like you came up with a format that I think was better than what we were doing last year, and I think I'd like you to keep steering it that way. That we stay on track. I don't want to lose the rudder here a little bit, and let's preview the Atlantic, the soon to be won by the Knicks Atlantic.
All right. Well, we do have to start in the way that if we're going to follow this format, we got to start in the way that they finished last year. So we got to start with Boston. We will save, in your words, the best till last. We'll get to New York.
That's right. That's right.
But the Celtics over the offseason here, a couple of pretty high-profile moves. Malcolm Brogdon comes in from Indiana, a guy that's been injured a lot. Danilo Gallinari, who had played some good minutes for the Atlanta Hawks as a playoff team the last couple seasons, was brought in and should have been a contributor. And now, unfortunately, for the Rooster, he's got a torn ACL and will miss the rest of the year. So Boston is... They're out on the lookout again, it sounds like, for another bench piece. Carmelo Anthony has been mentioned as a bench scorer, because that's really what Gallinari was supposed to do, is just get out there and knock down some shots with the second unit. There's a couple of other names that are floating around. So there's not a ton of movement here, but I want to ask what you liked about the offseason. I think for me, the default is Malcolm Brogdon, in that he adds another layer of versatility to a backcourt that once they added Derrick White last year by a trade with San Antonio. I mean, we could even say that that's still our favorite move if you wanted to go that route. Derrick White, who looked like a decent player in San Antonio, who the Spurs gave a lot of looks to find out if he was going to be a building block, and then finally decided he's not a building block. They move him on, but White gets to Boston, and being able to slide into a role player slot instead of a key guy slot really, really took off and gave them some nice stuff. He was energetic defensively. He shot the ball well enough, which is kind of what he did in San Antonio, but just gave them a different gear out there as a hustle guy who seemed to be all over the place, Johnny on the spot offensively and defensively, covering a lot more ground than a guy who plays in such a bad stance. Like Derrick White runs as straight up and down as just about anybody I've ever seen in the NBA. The dude's practically on his tiptoes and does get into a stance defensively, but it's really odd to see how far like he gets up to run and then gets down into a stance. I honestly cannot think of another NBA player that I've seen who does this and gets away with it. But I like the Malcolm Brogdon acquisition for much the same reason, because Brogdon is a solid defender, whereas White is really, really good. But Brogdon is a really good offensive player, a guy who has been capable of 20 points per game, whether it's with the Bucks or with the Pacers. The problem is he's been hurt, and sliding him to a role player spot, sixth man off the bench. Ideally, you'd have to think that the Celtics still start Marcus Smart and Jalen Brown together in the backcourt. That worked so well. But you've got size now with all four guards, massive interchangeability with all four guards, because Derrick White played some point guard in San Antonio. Smart played point guard last year for the Celtics and has done it in his career previously. Brogdon has played both guard spots. And then you've got one traditional point guard in Payton Pritchard, now moving back to like the cleanup role a little bit. And I think that's a better spot for him than everyday rotation guy. I don't know. Do you got anybody else that you like, or is Brogdon really kind of the no-brainer pick here?
Brogdon's the no-brainer pick. I do think that, losing Daniel Tice because of that trade is okay. The Pacers got a lot from the Celtics as far as just dudes, not like dudes that play, but like literally just bodies, right?
Yeah.
But they didn't have to give up any major pieces, outside maybe if you loved Aaron Nesmith, maybe if you really liked him, but I don't think that team's worse for the wear because of that trade, because of losing Aaron Nesmith and a Daniel Tice and a few other fellas.
And Nesmith works better on a rebuilding Pacers team, right, than a Celtics team that needs to win a championship,
Probably. He probably has a more opportunity to be able to show how good he could possibly be. And who knows? Like he has shown flashes when he has gotten in and gotten some consistent minutes that he can be pretty solid. We just haven't seen a ton of it because the Celtics were deeper than I think we were expecting them to be, last year.
And Nesmith was not trusted last year with playoff minutes. They tried to give him that a couple of times, and you're right, he showed some flashes during the regular season, but those playoff minutes did not look great.
Yeah, and
or I should say key minutes, because I mean, I don't know how many playoff minutes he really got in the long run, but it seemed like he got some down the stretch, and that's when he struggled.
Well, you got to give Boston credit too for like making the decision. Like, hey, we may have a script that we want to keep to as far as like how we've played these guys throughout the season, but if Nesmith's going to be terrible on the court in the playoffs, we just can't play him. And that's fine. He didn't play all that well in the playoffs when he got on the court, and he never really got a chance to sort of play through it, because they had too many good players to be able to afford that. Look where they got. They got to the championship round. So I think the versatility, the depth you're provided by a Malcolm Brogdon makes you much more formidable. But I also do think that I'm not sure still about Boston. Yeah, and this is not coming as someone who thinks the Celtics should be underneath Boston Harbor right now. This is someone who just like I don't know. I think this is probably unfair, Joel. So just you could call me on it. It's fine, because it really doesn't matter as long as you get there to be able to play it. But I think Boston got fortunate with their matchups last year in the playoffs. That, when it comes to playing Brooklyn, like, listen, you beat the snot out of them, that's fine. But Brooklyn was a very injured team coming into that. Clearly, they were literally like a one-man gang trying to come in, and as much as you can do sometimes in the season, one guy's not going to carry a team as like an 8 seed, right?
Yeah, but they had to go 7 games against the Bucks and the Heat. But I know where you're going with this, that those were pretty flawed teams too, right?
Yeah. Well, Milwaukee lost like their second best player on the team. And Miami, I think, as much as Miami was the team, right last year, like for the giant chunks of it. Again, we said it a lot last year. Miami plays just a very you can't make mistakes style. They're going to try to force you into mistakes, but sometimes you're underwhelming with the level of athleticism that you have and the depth of
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
That especially when you lose like a Jimmy Butler or something for any stretch of time,
Right.
it's really hard to overcome. So, like, I think they had a not an easy path to the championship, to the Eastern Championship and to the finals, but they had a more manageable road. And again, those are good teams with good players, but when they played them for all the games of the series, they weren't the playoff great teams that we were kind of expecting, even going into the playoffs by the time we got there. So I'm still a wait and see a little bit on Boston. I think they're clearly a top 2, top 3 team, but
Mm-hmm.
as far as being able to win the conference or win the NBA, I think it'll end up being matchups or whatever moves they end up making this year. I don't even know if they will even be. Well, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, it's only September we're talking, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. The Eastern Conference, as we break down all the different teams, it's going to be a tight race at the top. Again, there's not a lot that separates. And yeah, we're lauding the arrival of Malcolm Brogdon, but that's a guy who hasn't been able to stay healthy in quite a long time. That's why he's on the Celtics and not a starter in Indiana. Gallinari's gone already. Daniel Tice didn't give them, I think, the same type of impact last year that he did in his previous stint.
He was
In his previous stint with the Celtics, but I think he would have been more important this year than last because Al Horford's another year older. He's at some point got to cede minutes.
Yeah.
Boston is very well equipped to play 4 smaller guys plus 1 center. I mean, because Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum can both play some small ball 4. Grant Williams gets in that mix a little bit too and gives them good minutes. But really right now at center, you're looking at Robert Williams, who just keeps getting better and better as a young player, but has had some injury issues. And Al Horford as your other option. And Horford's age has got to be a concern. I know he played very effectively last year and they managed his minutes and all that, but it just feels like they might be a body short and you could get into a very scary situation where all of a sudden you're handing major minutes to Luke Cornett off the bench.
Hey, come on. Don't.
Sorry, Luke.
Don't
but
disrespect my man, Luke.
You have to bump Grant Williams into the starting lineup, and now Cornett's your backup center. He becomes your starting center because you got Horford and Williams out. I'm concerned about that. And Gallinari getting hurt really throws a wrench into some of that because Gallo was going to play not a critical role for them, but an important role of reliable bench scoring and a guy who could just come in and hit a 3. And so now you're looking at final roster spots and dwindling amount of money going, do we try to get Carmelo Anthony here? Is that the type of guy that we want on this roster? Yeah, he did good things in Portland, but he did okay with LA in a dumpster fire that made everybody look bad. And Carmelo's not that far removed from being a major distraction on teams. So you still at least have pause about that. And you go, do we spend our spot on Carmelo or do we got to get another big in here just to be safe?
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that. I have a feeling Boston may kind of wait till the last minute. And they're, maybe one of those teams that brings a guy in early in the season, but really is keeping an eye on the buyout market, the trade market, making those pieces later on. So I guess I would file that in the category of what I don't like about this team, what I least like about the off season. I don't know if you differ at all, but I guess the next question,
I just think Robert Williams, especially like with the injury that we saw at the end of this playoffs, going into the at the end of the playoff series with
he was hobbling around. He was hobbling.
Yeah, like he tried to have it addressed, I think, at the end of the season, and then didn't opt for, I think, the big surgery that would have probably taken care of it, but left him out the entire season. So I think he missed like 4 or 5 weeks or something at the end of the year and into the playoffs. Then came back, and again, one of these things, like once he had some legs underneath them, like was really good.
Yeah.
But also when he had to go, play not back to back, but games in a row, you could tell he was hobbling some. So I think an offseason will probably help with that, and I hope it doesn't become an injury concern for him because I think he's a pretty good player.
I enjoy him, and he is really the X factor, maybe even more than Marcus Smart at this point, who has to be a reliable guy every single night. But yeah, I think Williams' impact on a game defensively and ability to play above the rim and to finish lob plays and all that sort of stuff, I think that oftentimes is the difference of Boston winning or not. Final question for the Celtics before we move on. They were first last year in the division. Do they finish the same or worse than last year?
Oh, worse.
So you think, were you taking them second, third? Where would you put them?
I'm taking them second.
Okay. This is a tough one for me.
You'll know why.
I think I'll go on record as saying I'll pick Boston to win it. But like last year, where it was a literal tie with Philly, it's going to come down that close, and maybe even a three-way tie with, if Brooklyn can get their act together in time. But I think Boston, Philly, Brooklyn are right in that mix again.
Yeah, if I'm not picking as a pure homer, I think they're probably the clear favorites to be able to win this division again this year.
But you are a clear homer, so
I'll say first,
okay.
but I'm gonna use it as a jinx, so that hopefully jinxes the Celtics.
Well, speaking of teams that were jinxed last year quite a bit, the Philadelphia 76ers had a wild ride where Joel Embiid was an MVP candidate, and as Joel Embiid is wont to do, got himself hurt during the middle of the year during a really critical stretch, and they missed some games out of that. Philadelphia gets James Harden, and Harden does Harden things, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. And Philadelphia also, you look at their supporting cast, and there are times they look wonderful and perfectly fit, and other times where where the problem lies on the Sixers group. And we head into an offseason where some pretty big moves were made. The keys to the point guard spot are clearly Tyrese Maxey's now to play in that backcourt with James Harden. It's not a question anymore of whether Shake Milton is the guy. DeAnthony Melton was brought in mid-season or late season from the Memphis Grizzlies, but Melton really didn't get much run with Philly. I think he's a guy along with Isaiah Joe who will probably play bigger and bigger roles, except it's a Doc Rivers team. And much like Tom Thibodeau, Doc Rivers kind of favors his top 7-8 guys, and everybody else is just chopped liver. They've still got Furkan Korkmaz, who may or may not be on the roster as they continue to look to improve with shooters. Consistent shooting was an issue for them. Daniel House, brought in from the Houston Rockets formerly. He's a Daryl Morey guy, and Morey bringing some of his former players in. Speak of the devil, it's PJ Tucker, who now moves from the Miami Heat and formerly of the Milwaukee Bucks. He's just kind of bouncing around the Eastern Conference among the championship contenders, but PJ Tucker got the eye-opening 3-year, $30 million deal as a 37-year-old who plays good defense and sets a tone and does some things, but has been a non-factor offensively for quite a while. And 37 years old is your lead defender? I'm not sure about that. And then Montrezl Harrell, a guy who energy, and does a couple of things really, really well. But I see a lot of interesting parallels between Montrez and Russell Westbrook in that style that they play, where they're just the bull in the china shop, and there's a lot of good things that can happen, but efficiency-wise tells a little bit of a different story because of what they give up in certain other areas. And like Russ, Montrezl Harrell has bounced around some teams here and not been well-liked in locker rooms. There's been a lot of scuttlebutt, whether it was in Washington, whether it was with the Clippers near the end, whether it was with Charlotte last year. Montrez can't seem to latch on to a place, and there's not a lot of people who speak his praises outside of, hey, that guy plays hard. And you see, like, there's little things. I've been watching Montrez in games. He's one of the only players that I know who will get an assist and never point out the guy who assisted. He'll get animated for himself, but you don't even get a finger point. I cannot remember the last time that I saw Harrell do that. And it's not like I watch every single game, so I might be missing stuff here. but it becomes glaring after a while that he's got that perpetual scowl on his face. He's got that little bit of that reputation, and you just never see him like dapping up his guys or giving credit for somebody that fed him. And I don't know, maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill.
You are making a mountain, my man.
Let's start with the positive. With all of these different moves that the Sixers made, what do you like the most about where they're headed? Remember, Tobias Harris, Matisse Thybulle still in the mix as well, but could be trade bait to make another move here.
I like that they were able to clean up the roster a lot. And by cleaning up, I mean like get clarity of positions that I think that, you know, Philadelphia lacked, I guess, at least from an outsider standpoint, curtain clarity. You mentioned Tyrese Maxey and him being slated now as your guard, like your point guard, like the dude to lead the charge. And I think Philadelphia is better for that. I think Philadelphia is a better team when he is that. I like the fact that that you moved on from Danny Green. You traded him away. You got DeAndre Jordan off your roster.
Yeah.
I think, you know, you just gave the whole he doesn't point out people after getting assists thing, and that's fine. I mean that's fine. Maybe that does churn.
And it might be nothing
way for some people.
I readily cop that it might be nothing. You know.
But I love watching Montrezl Harrell play. I think he is one of my top 10 favorite to watch play because of all that. Let me go back to the good you were mentioning, the energy. Like there's just so much passion when you have so many players in the NBA and in professional sports too. That you have some who gloat, but you have some that like feel like it's business. Like this guy feels like every time out there means something to him. And I think that kind of energy for a team, and I will say this for Doc Rivers led teams, and especially this Philadelphia one, they felt flat the last 2 years. Not felt flat, felt like they felt like it was not a very interested team to be where they were a lot of times. It felt like everything was just call a play, run a play, call a play, run a play. And
especially when Embiid wasn't in the mix. I think Embiid brought that edge and that passion, but you take him off the floor, whether by injury or substitution, I 100% agree with you.
So I think having a dude like that on your roster is going to be big for Philadelphia. At least I hope it would be. I'm not going out there and saying they're going to win anything ever again. Okay, maybe
we've been picking them for a while.
Maybe the last 2 years it's just me jinxing them, and that's my fault for doing that. I apologize to the very active on Twitter Doc Rivers, but I would like just to put it this way: that I think Philadelphia is better now than what they were. They don't have the headache going into the season that they had with Ben Simmons at all. That's completely off the table. And so this feels like for a team that does have a lot of veterans, and Joel Embiid's clearly a veteran, but like the PJ Tuckers of the world, as you mentioned, the dude who's, you know, probably most likely on his last contract, or like definitely a significant contract in the NBA, that I think you have enough everything around Philadelphia with a refresh that if James Harden can be, I'm hoping somewhat, and I don't know what it is. We talked about this some last year. I don't know where the wall was he hit it, because it felt like it happened suddenly, right? Like it didn't feel like a gradual decline in his game. It felt like it just a push off a cliff.
Right. Where he's a decent player, but you're paying MVP money for a guy that's nowhere near that conversation anymore.
Yeah, and for me, the money's here nor there because it's not mine, and I can't really do anything about it. But if you can,
but when you pay that, you've got an expectation.
Well, Well, if you can stop the bleeding from the production standpoint, I should say, if you could sort of get even what you had last year with James Harden, even though we were expecting more, just get that production and know that's the production you're going to get. I think it changes your mindset a little bit as far as how you prepare for a game and how you prepare for expecting things from this team. But I think all of that sort of bodes well for another good Philadelphia season. I don't know if it can be great, but I think the way they cleaned up this roster was probably about as good as you can do. I don't know where you stand on that, Joel, but I think they cleaned off dead weight. I think they cleaned off some players that they put on their roster just because they thought they would help, or certain players wanted them to help. And they just said, listen, I don't know what kind of run we got left here, but we have got to adjust the way the locker room dynamics are, and we've got to adjust a little bit of the play on the court.
I like overall everything that they've done. Like you, watching Montrezl Harrell is fun for the same reasons that it's fun watching Russell Westbrook. There's that gear, there's that passion. That is going to be helpful. There is going to be very reliable scoring and rebounding production when Harrell gets in the game. They did not have that at the backup center spot last year. It's been an issue. And when Joel Embiid misses games, it's an issue. Montrezl Harrell is not Joel Embiid, but at least it's not a giant question mark behind him. This guy's been sixth man of the year before. That was with Doc Rivers on the Clippers. He has been a starter. He's been a key contributor. He's going to do his job. And for all that passion and energy that he brings on the offensive end, PJ Tucker still brings on the defensive end. And so it's a good dichotomy, I think, to add those two different energy players. I could see Tucker and Harrell butting heads if Montrez is not locked in defensively, which does happen sometimes. And PJ is going to be the guy to call you out and go after you. And Montrez is going to have to be able to handle that criticism. But I like the overall energy that's there. It's an addition versus what they had last year, where DeAndre Jordan's completely out of gas. And Danny Green, while a decent player, is just kind of a steady Eddie type of guy, not super emotional. You kind of get what you get, and he's so feast or famine from three. Tyrese Maxey has a different gear than anybody else on the Sixers does, and that's including Harrell.
For sure.
And
for sure.
Giving him the keys, and I got to admit that I was wrong. Last year when James Harden arrived, I thought that Maxey was going to fall off a cliff. And instead it was Harden who production went down, and Maxey was actually far better with James Harden. And so they figured out how to make it work. Harden seems to be on board with giving him the keys. Doc Rivers is. But in all of this, and I like the fact that Tobias Harris now doesn't have to lift as much as before. Yeah, he's still the third guy, but he doesn't have to play up to potentially be the second guy. And Matisse Thybulle is an all-NBA defender. When he was getting thrown into rumors this offseason about getting traded, I was like, that's a mistake if you're Philly. I know he's not good offensively, but you need that guy in the mix. You don't want PJ Tucker being your lead defender. So I really do hope that Philadelphia continues, and I'm impressed that they so far have found a way to not include Thybulle in any trades. And I would hope that they do that. I just like the versatility of the roster. I feel like you've got guys that can play small ball 4. You can play big. You can play small. You've got some insulation for Joel Embiid now. But the number one thing that I like about the roster is that I have not seen a single fat James Harden picture all year.
Yeah.
I have not.
And you've been looking. You have Google alerts for that. You do.
Yeah, I got all my searches, preloaded. What we've seen instead is a James Harden who is consciously in the weight room, saying the right things, which means nothing because James Harden is a classic say the right thing guy until he decides not to. But we're not getting the club stories. We're not getting the distraction whispers.
Well, we do have the one story where he was gifted like $250,000 from a rapper, in a suitcase. Sure. But I mean, that's not his fault. That a rapper gave him $250,000 for his birthday in a suitcase. Okay,
what have you? I don't really want to know the story behind all that.
That's true. But I mean, we got the video of it, so it's weird.
As long as he's in shape.
Yeah.
And mentally locked in, and the effort that it takes for James Harden to dedicate the entire offseason to being in shape by training camp is not a consistent thing that we've seen in his career. It has been a downfall thing. It has been a Shaq-like thing where you go, how good could James Harden or Shaq have been, even beyond as good as they were? How much better could they have been if they had not played their way into shape through so many first thirds of seasons? And so I'm excited. I hope for the best for Philly and for James Harden. I hope he has a monster year. I hope he's productive in a way that he does not have to be MVP, but he does all those little things, which, by the way, James Harden is very capable of doing. He's really a multi-talented player beyond just drawing fouls and getting to the free throw line, which is what he's been labeled as. So I hope he has a great year, and this all comes to fruition.
I think there's a good shot for a bounce back type season.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know if last year was because of either mental issues, not
Right.
bad, just like wasn't into it completely, or the physical toll that not being as in shape, and then apparently losing 25 pounds in like 3 days or whatever the photos seem to imply. But I think there is a chance to see more of 2020 James Harden than we saw in 2021 and 2022.
If there's any move I don't like, I mentioned it already. It's PJ Tucker, and it's just the length of the contract. It's the amount of money. You're a tight Philadelphia team that has a lot of good players on the roster, and so it's Daryl Morey. You know he'll figure out a way to make it work if this doesn't work, but it feels like eating up flexibility for a guy you didn't really need to break that big of a bank for, but it is what it is. For Philadelphia, I'm going to pick them to finish probably in the same slot as last year, in second, but just barely. And if there is a team in the Atlantic Division that's going to upend the Celtics in first, I think it is the Sixers. I think the upside there is really intriguing. But like you've said, the problem is we've said this and thought this many times before, and something comes up. Something comes up along the way, usually in batches of 3, and they just can't play up to that potential. If they don't play up to potential, Doc Rivers is gone. Like, this is his last year in Philadelphia.
He has lived on that 08 championship as long as he probably can. Not even in the league, but even in Philadelphia. Like, they've got to have something. They got to get. They've spent money. They've made big trades. They've brought in big dudes physically too. It's just it's time for something to happen. And yeah, they've made deep playoff runs, but you know, you got to get past like in Atlanta this year. You know, you've got to get to the Eastern Conference Championship and probably win it this year. Like, I would be surprised. I don't know if he loses his job if he gets to the Eastern Conference Championship, but if it's semifinals or worse, yeah, he's gone.
He's not a Daryl Morey guy.
That's true. That is a good point.
So, do you feel comfortable? I mean, you got Philly in second as well? Or do you
I got him in third. I got him in third. I think they're a better overall team than what they are last year. But again, part of this is I've been burnt by this team so often. So this is another team that's a more wait and see. But I think Philadelphia, I'm not going to say it. I think they can be very competitive in the Eastern Conference. How about I say that? I just put it that way. I think they are well suited to make a deep playoff run.
We moved to the team that did finish in third last year. The Toronto Raptors surprised a lot of people. We mentioned that in the open.
And made a lot of moves.
Let's just get right down to it. That was a team that had a really intriguing starting 5 that played really well together. The bench left them short quite often, but somehow was cobbled together good enough for them to win 48 games. We saw their limitations when they got to the playoffs. There were some injuries as well. Fred VanVleet kind of broke down right at the end when he wasn't supposed to, but that's what happens when you play guys a ton of minutes and you don't have that insulation behind them. Favorite moves for me is not really one guy. It's just the fact that there was a concerted effort to bring in other usable players. And I look at the front line, at least small forward through center, and I see enough depth there. Behind OG Anunoby, you've got Otto Porter, who showed that he at least still has a career after winning a championship with the Golden State Warriors. He gave them some productive minutes. You got Chris Boucher and Thad Young and Daniel Aturu behind Scotty Barnes, who, yeah, the Raptors are banking a lot that kid is going to be a multi-time all-star. It looks like there's a strong possibility of that. Pascal Siakam's got Precious Achiuwa and Khem Birch behind him. Achiuwa's got some upside for sure. I liked him in Miami. I liked him last year in Toronto. Another year under his belt is a good thing. Khem Birch is just a reliable rotation guy. I hate the level of depth behind their 2 key backcourt guys. Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr. have Malachi Flynn and nothing behind them. And it's a major problem still. But I think Toronto is going to go that Boston route, and you're going to see OG Anunoby and Scotty Barnes playing shooting guard a lot more than you have in the past. Just the way that the Celtics bumped Jalen Brown up a spot, and they're going to rely on that front court depth. They're going to have to. I also just like the fact for the Raptors that they are 1 year older. The fact that Van Vliet, Trent, Anunoby, especially Barnes, but Pascal Siakam as well. These are all young guys. And every single one of them, with the exception maybe of Gary Trent Jr., who's more of like a prototypical just scoring guard. But the other 4 guys have all shown or been all-stars. They've shown those flashes or they've been there. And there is a lot to like. We don't give the Raptors enough respect. I don't think we recognize the actual talent that's there because we get caught up in the fact that the rest of the depth chart has kind of looked like your make a team on NBA 2K after you're 20 years in, and it's just guys you don't recognize.
Okay, let me just briefly tell you what I do like. I like Josh Jackson coming to this team. I like Otto Porter, but let me tell you what I like the most. Okay, are you ready? Are you sitting down, Joel?
Juan Hernangomez?
No, although I do think he's
Bo Cruz.
I'll tell you this. Okay, first thing I like the very most is I like how active they were in free agency. Right, I thought that they got a lot of pieces that I think kind of do work, but again, I don't see enough of Nick Nurse's team to know how good they're going to be generally. Like, I was way off on them last year, so I'm not sure how these guys are going to fit this year, but I do like the names. I do like the versatility. I do like what they could do, but that's all sort of pie in the sky stuff. What I do really like is I like who they drafted. Do you remember who they drafted?
I mean, they drafted a couple of people. Give me.
Watch it. Their first draft pick was a Christian Coloco, the kid out of Arizona, who is a guy who is he was all Pac-12 basically last year, all Pac-12 defensive too. He went from averaging like 2 points a game like his freshman year to like 13 last season. He's a rim protector. He's 7'1". He's a big fella. Like, I think he fits exactly the kind of style that I think would be if Toronto is doing everything that they want to do perfectly, if they're building a team. I feel like this is a plug and play. This guy could be really good for us for a long time kind of draft pick. So I think that guy, and he's a really good shot blocker. Is
that analogous to like Walker Kessler, who you said very similar things about, when Minnesota got him and now he's on Utah?
Now, Walker Kessler is a little bit different only because Walker Kessler. So Coloco's a good rim protector in general, right? Like Walker Kessler is too, but Kessler does it because like he has this weird way of like, and if you're watching the video on YouTube, you can see me doing it. Like, he angles his body in just like these contortionist type ways that he doesn't get the fouls for the most part called on him. But he's able to be super effective that way, even though he's not super physical. Coloco's a little different. Coloco's a little more physical, but he's again, big rim protector, long, lanky guy who's going to be able to, I think, pay dividends early and often for Toronto. So as far as me, I think the aggressiveness in free agency was solid. It can't be easy to get people to come to Toronto, like no matter how good your team is, right? Like, granted, Toronto coming off the World Championship was literally about to lose Kawhi Leonard. So you're like, oh, all right, that's fair enough. But we're not going to get better than the World Championship, right, that we just had. So to be able to get like a Josh Jackson and Otto Porter, I think is a big coup for them. And to be able to, I mean, you're going to have to do it through the draft, essentially. Draft and trades if you can get it. And I think that draft pick was wonderful. I was a little surprised Coloco went, I think it was like 34, 35 overall to him, maybe 36 or something. I can't remember. But he fell far enough for him, and I think they were fortunate to pick him up. And I think he's going to be a big guy for them.
Yeah.
Literally, Joel, he's 7'1".
That is pretty big. With the exception of Fred VanVleet, everybody can play multiple positions on the Raptors. Gary Trent's a little undersized as a 2, but we'll give you some minutes at the 1 as well. But Nick Nurse is one of those classic coaches, and he's established himself this way, of just crazy lineups. We'll play zone. we'll do this, we'll full court press, we will do this one thing this one time in this one game and nail it. We executed it, and you will not see it again all season until I bust it out again in the playoffs. Like, and I do look at this roster and I see enough young guys that they've got that upside, they've got that energy, and enough older guys who can come in and continue to execute. I'm still concerned about that backcourt, but Toronto's going to be tough, and it's really hard in this division where it was so tight to keep betting against Toronto.
Like, I'm about to.
I know, and it's hard. Like, I picked them in last year. It's really hard to see them higher than third, but I don't even know if I can pick them in third again. And you know, I'm going to put Toronto in fourth.
Me too.
And I'm going to say they make the playoffs again.
And that's fourth. Fourth is just in the division, right? This is a pretty solid division, I think.
Yes.
So I think you're going to see another. I think you're going to see another year where you get almost the entire division into the playoffs. Like I can foresee that. I think this is a really good division. That fourth doesn't win you the division, doesn't get you any kind of playoff guarantees, but it does get you in the dance. And like you said, Nick Nurse is one of these crazy dudes that could make a series tough just because he's so unconventional with the way he approaches how he sets up his game.
I will say this. They are one major Fred VanVleet injury away from winning under 30 games, though. Like, this is an issue that has to be addressed. I don't care how you feel about Malachi Flynn. If VanVleet goes down, you don't have a replacement. I know they would do something crazy like let Scotty Barnes just bring the ball up. And Pascal Siakam has done some ball handling. You know, he's listed as center right now, but really is more of a 4. They've used him in some crazy ways. But, like, you are using bubble gum and baling wire if VanVleet goes down. And they do have to look at that issue in the backcourt. I hope that they will, but yeah.
I do also think that could be a multi-year try to attempt to sort of address that for not only just a year or two, but like for something you can build a franchise around for 4 or 5 years. But I don't think that's unfair.
Yeah, and in the end, they'll go as far as Scotty Barnes develops. They still need that star guy. They've got guys who are near stars, and they got to go with that. All right, let's get to the team that had all the headlines that we talk about way too often, and no matter how much we want to stop talking about them, the Brooklyn Nets always come up. But they didn't come up in the division. They were 4th last year and started out great. Things fell apart, and it turned into, I think, one of the kind of almost all-time dumpster fire type of seasons that I can remember, especially for teams that were front runners. You think of like the 2004 Lakers. You think of later on was the 2012 Lakers when Dwight Howard and Steve Nash got there. You think about the Nets with KG and Paul Pierce and that sort of thing. This was up there. This was really, really bad. But we're going to talk about the future, not the past, because we've talked about the past so much. Ben Simmons is supposed to theoretically be an NBA player who's going to play on an NBA team this year. It'll be the Brooklyn Nets. They added in a lot of different pieces on the fringe. Royce O'Neal comes over and trade from Utah. Royce O'Neal was a starter there with the Jazz. Solid guy. TJ Warren is a guy who's not been healthy in 80 years, but theoretically is a productive offensive player when he's on the court. Markieff Morris hasn't held down a rotation spot in a while, but is going to be your backup center and is one of those savvy veterans. And I think big news, Joe Harris is healthy. And Joe Harris is back on the roster on a team that already has Seth Curry, already has Patty Mills, already has Kyrie Irving, already has Kevin Durant. You have a crap ton of three-point shooting on this team when everybody's healthy and vaccinated and able to play.
Joel, I honestly don't know what to do with this team. I feel like every time I talk about the Brooklyn Nets, I'm being duped one way or the other. Like I cannot for the life of me see how this team is great this year.
I don't want to be completely macabre and say on tombstone, but I think the t-shirt that would best sum up Kyrie Irving's career is exactly what you just said. I feel like I'm being duped one way or another.
I don't know how people can continuously trust this team farther than they can throw them. And you brought up the roster moves, and you brought up the guys that can't stay healthy, and everyone who just jacks up threes, and yeah, you have the reluctant return of Kevin Durant to the franchise, and I think they could be good. I don't think I feel like that's going to be anything other than good in the regular season.
Okay.
But I don't know if that gets you anywhere near the top of the Atlantic this year. Like, I do think Boston, and I do think Philadelphia, and I do think those two teams are better.
The Raptors aren't going away.
They're not going away, but I like you said, the Raptors are hanging on by like an injury thread, right? Like they have to, like it could go one way or the other fairly quickly for them. I think they're a best of third team in the Atlantic Division team this year, which means I think they would be in a better position they were last year to make it to the playoffs. But I don't love this team. Like I love the top two guys. And I told you, as much as I hate Kyrie, I love the guy on the court. He is
me too,
phenomenal to watch. I just don't.
And I think he actually complements Durant rather well.
I think
because he can knock down a spot up shot very, very well and off the dribble. And I like the way those two fit, even though they're both ball dominant.
I think at best, I think I could see them probably in the division is third at best. I just think that there are better teams, more cohesive teams, and that generally wins out over the long period of time, over the long stretch of 82 games, and definitely into the playoffs themselves. But I don't think just having Kevin Durant for another year, like he's been in the league since 04, right? 05? Like we're 17 years into this thing, like 18 years. Like I don't think you just keep guaranteeing, the servant. We should keep calling him that.
He would not like that.
It was his idea. I don't know. I don't know. Durantula. Let's go back to Durantula. I don't know how I can just keep banking on that guy to carry a team. Remember when they had that stretch right before Kyrie came back of like 18 games or something where Kevin Durant was averaging like 32 points or something. Like he was
doing everything.
Doing
everything.
He was the only thing they had. Like it should be less this year because the COVID restrictions are nil now for the most part. But I don't know. I can't buy into anything this team has done other than like, getting rid of Andre Drummond or something. Just let his contract go away.
I will say this. If I were going to build a team to maximize the many good things that Ben Simmons used to be capable of doing, and I have to say used because we haven't seen it now in so long.
Yeah.
But if I were going to build a team, the Nets have followed the blueprint. There are shooters all over the place, and Ben Simmons can go out there and play because he is such a good defender. Like Ben Simmons is an all NBA defender when locked in.
Yeah.
Because he can go and play that small ball five for them. You can get some really interesting lineups where you've got four shooters, but it's not just spot up guys that are, waiting on Ben Simmons to break down a defense or post people up and kick it out, which he can do and is very adept at. You've got the ability to run a fast break, maybe not as well as in Philadelphia, but to run half-court offense for him, much, much better than when he was constantly running into Joel Embiid and you just didn't have that spacing. So I like that aspect of it. I like the theory of what this team could be if Ben Simmons is locked in and Durant is able to put aside the past and give a year, and Kyrie is able to go, look, my career is going to hinge on what I do this year. After all the distractions, can I, for one season, show up and play really, really, really good basketball and sometimes be the top guy and sometimes be the second guy and just ball it out. And if you can do that, Kyrie Irving has a lot of career left. If it is a distraction-filled year again, he does not have much career left, and he may be the one to prematurely pull the plug Barry Sanders style. And we're going to be left going, what if?
I'm finishing with Brooklyn on this because we've talked about them enough. Just not on this pod, but just.
And I know you want to get to the Knicks, and we're headed to overtime anyway.
This franchise tried to trade one of those two guys, and this franchise had the other guy tried to force his way out. This offseason.
Yep.
Like, sure, they can win some games together, but I'm not betting on it.
It feels better than the Lakers last year, where we looked at the Lakers and go, I see on paper how this could work, but I see 800 reasons how it couldn't. With Brooklyn, I see a lot more reasons of how it could, but you are asking for Ben Simmons, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant to all be mentally tough and undistracted for an entire season to put this together. And if they can, that would be great. But show me the last time that all three of them individually were mentally undistracted and mentally tough. And then show me the possibility, the over-under on all three of them being locked in. That's the goal. That's the blueprint. Again, I'm putting them in third as well, just because they're too talented to bump any lower. But, I wish I could put them higher. This is a frustrating team, because if everything was all together, they could win the division.
Yeah, they could.
But I've seen too many Nets teams in the history of that franchise that were talented nightmares. And
the best player on that team tried to get the coach fired.
Yeah.
This offseason. The other guy before last season said, we don't even need coaches on this team. Said, we're the coaches.
Cool.
What do you do with that? Like, how do you expect anything great from that?
From one dysfunctional organization to another, we move to the fifth place New York Knicks. You knew that was coming. New York previously, 2 years ago, was a revelation. And in Tibbs fashion...
Thank you for saying that.
In Tibbs fashion, they were a regression last year in year two.
You could stop. You could have stopped before that.
But some moves have been made and some things have been done, and it's not all doom and gloom in New York. And it wasn't, as you very aptly put at the top of the show, it was not all doom and gloom last year either. Just some long-standing frustrations. But Jalen Brunson comes in via free agency. RJ Barrett still on the team. Donovan Mitchell not there. I actually think long-term, it's better that they went this route. I did not like Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Brunson in the same backcourt. That's a preview. Cam Reddish was brought in from Atlanta mid-year. They never really played the dude. He's too talented not to play. I don't understand it, but he's there. Obi Toppin is there still, a year older. Isaiah Hartenstein behind Mitchell Robinson, both at the center spot. Both of them a year older. Derrick Rose, unfortunately, a year older. I'm going to give you the floor overall here for the Knicks, but I'll just very briefly say, I like the young guys that they have there. I like the veterans that they have there. Julius Randle is not old by any means. Evan Fournier can give you at least a little bit of production still. Derrick Rose will give you some production. I feel like the depth overall on this team is better and makes more sense than it did last year. I felt like the depth was really shaky 2 years ago, but they, Julius Randle just had an amazing season and they had a defensive intensity about them. So I'm not down on the Knicks this year. I think they're in a better position. But my perpetual downage is a Tom Thibodeau team. And to go, yeah, you've got some pieces on the roster, but dude, are you going to ever use them in a logical way? Or are you just going to keep playing favorites? There, I've said my piece. That's really the Knicks in a nutshell to me. The floor is yours, my friend. This is your team.
I will not pick them to win the division. I was joking before. I do not want to jinx them that way. I do not think it's impossible that they win the division, but I don't think you have to win the division in this division, particularly to be considered the best team by the time you get to the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
I love the Jalen Brunson signing.
Yeah.
I think that is a huge offensive boost for this team. I do think he also fits more appropriately with what Tom Thibodeau would want. So I think that is a big deal. I think he'll play enough defense to where like he'll actually get to play, unlike Kemba Walker,
Mm-hmm.
who was not allowed to play on the team, I guess, the last 30 games or so, which was fine, I guess. If you're blowing 25-point leads, good, whatever. Um, I think the fact that they were able to keep RJ Barrett on the team and not have to push him for a potential trade for uh I'm blanking.
Donovan Mitchell.
Donovan Mitchell, yeah. I think that's better long term. I think you were sort of alluding to this too. I think it's better long term for the team as well. I know a lot of people freaked out that the Knicks didn't get Donovan Mitchell, but I also think that if you look at what Donovan Mitchell got in return, like what the trade was for him, like you essentially got like 4 rosters. It felt like full of people and picks. And the Knicks just aren't in a position, I think, to be gambling away that much stuff again.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're only a few years removed from getting rid of some of the most awful contracts in NBA history, and they just stacked on top of each other in the mid 2000s, mid 2000s, early teens. So
the Knicks at that time were putting all their eggs in one basket, and then when they ran out of eggs, they were borrowing against their losses. So I agree with that. I mean, RJ Barrett is a big, rugged guard with a lot of upside ahead of him, and Brunson is an undersized, rugged guard. So you add Donovan Mitchell into that mix, and you've got 2 undersized guards at their respective positions. Barrett, I think, complements Brunson just better in the short term and the long term, even if he's not going to be as good as Donovan Mitchell, but I honestly think he could be. I think Barrett still has that upside to be, and I look at Brunson and Barrett and Julius Randle, and I say, you have 3 legitimate near all-stars, guys who could get into that mix with a good season where any one of them could be all-stars. I don't see perennial all-stars, but I see guys who are in that conversation if playing well. There's going to be a lot of pressure on Jalen Brunson to produce. He was a role player in Dallas who showed out and now got handed a big contract by the Knicks. The Knicks have played this game before many, many times in their history of handing big contracts to guys who had a good year in a contract year. But what Brunson theoretically can do, as you have said, and what we did see him do in Dallas fits nicely with RJ Barrett, is not impossible to fit with Julius Randle. No. And there's some talented other guys there. Emmanuel Quickley, we didn't mention yet. Quentin Grimes, they like a lot.
I like Emmanuel Quickley a lot. Like I think he's like 6'2" or 6'3" or something. Cam Grimes is good. Hey, let's not forget about the guy who's not allowed to retire because Tom Thibodeau won't let him. Derrick Rose is still running around
back and presumably healthy.
He is always going to be Tom Thibodeau's backup plan as long as he's a coach in the NBA. And probably he started a lot more games than I think he should have started last season. But again, I don't want to just bang on Derrick Rose. He was fine. He was fine for the most part last year. I'm just make fun of the fact that Tom Thibodeau would love to carry that guy in his pocket everywhere he could if he could. So.
Here's what's great, though. New York is legit 11 deep. They're legit 11 deep of usable, verifiable NBA players.
This is the best depth they've had in a while of guys that you're not embarrassed to see on the court.
Yeah, and most of them are far better than just usable, verifiable NBA player. There's a lot more there. It really, to me, the X factor comes down to, can Tom Thibodeau deploy these guys in a way that best suits the roster and best suits and maximizes the players and not best suits and maximizes Tom Thibodeau's comfort zone of how he thinks a team should play forever after. That's the X factor. That's what's going to get him fired if it doesn't work, because the roster is better. There is upside if he can play this team to its strengths. And it's not that they're completely like he's going to have to dip completely out of his comfort zone either. But if he's trotting out 7-man rotations when you're 11 guys deep, and he is single play calling everything where you've got one bit of movement on the court again, as if this is like 1996, he deserves to get fired as quickly as they can usher him out the door. And I know I've insulted at Tibbs for a long time, but legit, he deserves to get fired ASAP if he brings that crap again to this roster.
I think if they start poorly, he could lose his job. I think if they start like a 5-10 kind of the beginning of the season, the roster, I think, you know, with the youth that's on it, like, you know, this isn't an old team. Quentin Grimes is like going into his second year, and, you know, RJ Barrett's still in his first contract, and you know, I mean, Jalen Brunson's he's the expensive dude. He and Julius Randle, who, you know, had that resurgent year last year, got into his feels last year a little bit, but once he realized that and apologized that he made a big mistake, he was pretty good the rest of the way. So, like, he's a guy that found a resurgence, found a new workout regimen, found a new routine that worked for him. He almost got himself out of the league, and now he's back in being, you know, a poor man's MVP 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago. So I think there's a lot of optimism to be had for this team. It's just you also have a lot of young parts that haven't seen a lot of time, especially together. So it's kind of going to be interesting to see if Tom Thibodeau goes back to his, okay, I'm not sure how RJ is going to go with this or how Jalen's going to go with it. Derrick, come on off the bench, brother. Come on off the bench. We're good for you, because I don't know if there's like versatility at this point in Tom Thibodeau's psyche to be able to adjust that way. So my fear is that whatever he's working on now in his system with these guys is just going to be a disaster. And so that's when you, like, if you go 5-11 or 5-12 to start the season, then maybe you're like, all right, let's flush it now. Let's see if we can salvage some of this season, because there's too much good talent, too much young talent, too much talent that's under long-term contracts that you could start to easily start rebuilding and say, hey, listen, we're not going to waste what we got right now. This is a chance right now for us.
There's too many other good coaches out there. Young up-and-coming guys, and I'm going to throw David Vanterpool's name and Sam Cassell's name out there because both of those guys deserve to be head coaches and to get their shot. Those feel like the type of coaches that would have a better chance of maximizing this roster by keeping an open mind. And maybe there's a reason that those guys have interviewed so many times and not been granted a slot yet. I don't know.
Or maybe it's one of those things like you got to go through a few interviews before you get the job. I'm not sure. Like, I don't know how many interviews Nick Nurse went through before he got the job. You know what I mean? So I don't know.
Yeah. And Nurse had head coaching experience at other levels too, and quite a few other levels.
That's fair.
It just, Tibbs is going to make or break this season. So I've got, man, it pains me to say this because I put Toronto in 4th. I got New York in 5th, but I don't want to do it because I think they should be better than that. I think they can be better than that. I just don't know where else to put them.
Okay. All right. So I have adjusted what I thought they were going to, because I realized I never gave a second place team earlier. And it's not going to be the Knicks. So I still have Boston as the top team. I have Philadelphia as the second team. I think I had them in 3rd. They're the second best team.
I matched that as well.
I have Brooklyn 3. I have New York 4. I have Toronto 5.
So, yeah, we're the same except for that 4 or 5 slot. I got Toronto 4 just because Nick Nurse makes something out of nothing. He's shown that so many times. And Tom Thibodeau makes nothing out of something. And he's shown that way too many times. And I'm banking on that. But I don't like it. Like, I do not feel good at all putting the Knicks in 5th. I wish they'd expand the division and give me 3 more teams in here so I could slot them under New York, because I think the Knicks will be better than that. I think
the Knicks will be better.
Possibly the Nets are a dumpster fire and New York sneaks up and Philly gets hurt or Boston massively underachieves. I mean, we've seen Boston look good on paper and then not get it done in previous years, but Kyrie Irving was on those teams. So I don't know.
I think the Knicks will be better, and that was a 37 wins last year?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think the Knicks are better with Tom Thibodeau or without him, but they are better this year. I don't think
I can agree with that.
I don't think he gets a long runway in 20, especially since, my favorite owner and yours, Mr. Jimmy Dolan, Jimmy Jam, like to do my jazz tour.
Master
Dolan.
Fedora.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go buy that album if you can.
Master of Puppets becomes Master of Fedoras.
He was on Jimmy Fallon's late night show playing with his band.
Mm-hmm.
It's just insane to me.
Yeah. Must be nice to be rich, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we already know, so that's fine. That's why we do this podcast. But here's what I think. I think I would be shocked if the Knicks started off poorly and he kept his job. Like, I think you get a chance to be bad for the first maybe month of the season.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, like, if you're bad, you're not making it to Christmas. So I
it has to be that way. Has to be.
Yeah. I mean, the Knicks are starting to get more high-profile games on TV. People are seeming to be more interested in them slowly and surely. Mm-hmm. They got to be a little more relevant 2 years ago, and last year they were a huge talking point, even though they finished just below getting into the playoffs. I don't think you can risk getting into those doldrums again.
No,
especially with this. This isn't a bunch of 40-year-old men on the roster now, and you've given them 18 to 25 a year for the next 3 years, kind of.
Let's just call them the Dolan drums. We can't get into the Dolan drums again.
I can't finish better than them. We can go out on that.
All right, David West, we did you proud. Episode 118 in the books. Like, share, subscribe. Find us on YouTube. It's Basketball by Association. Ring that bell. If you want the audio only version, Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts.